abruptly ended, and
Yeah.
minutes before the Q&A. So
No problem. Just go ahead. And
Yeah.
you can continue. You can
Thank
continue
you.
with
Yeah.
your presentation. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just gonna get back to this.
But so what happened is that we have given all our audiences like 5 minutes of break time. So I guess some of them might assume it's not yet started.
Okay.
So maybe we can just wait for others for 5 minutes or 10 minutes so that they can join us. So meanwhile, Eric and Aisha, thank you so much for joining us today. There was a bit of a glitch. So suddenly we planned to create a second session where I could join with the audio.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So yes,
Okay.
so we have got three of us. So and Eric and Aisha. So Aisha, while we're talking, I'll just drop two of my questions till others join us. So you mentioned that in some of the regions you showed us a graph regarding. Okay.
Sorry, can you drop the questions in the chat box?
Yeah. So am I audible now? Am I audible now?
You are audible. I don't see the question, but I'm listening.
Okay, perfect. So you mentioned about oil, like how oil sector's growth is kind of linked with Nigeria's growth in a way, or something of that order. So is oil still under protection of the state-owned enterprises of Nigerian government, or has oil also been liberalized and the Chinese can enter the oil business in Nigeria?
Yes, there are plenty of foreign actors in Nigeria's oil industry. The history of the industry is deep, so I don't have all the specific dates, but I am aware that there are laws that allow the Nigerian government to basically cede off shares of oil, and I guess when you do oil exploration, kind of like ceding off different parts of the ocean that you can now go and drill. And there are plenty of partnerships that are happening. And basically what you see is that you see plenty of foreign action and participation going on. That you see the Nigerian government kind of operating as the middleman, managing the resources and distributing them. But again, you don't see any development of Nigerian enterprise in this industry. So while you're seeing Chinese participation in the industry, you strangely just don't see any local participation. And that's where I'm seeing the issue. You know, if you're trying to develop these markets, the reliance on foreign direct investment in order to, increase your or decrease youth unemployment is, especially in an enclave industry like oil that doesn't really require a lot of labor, it's extremely capital intensive, is problematic, you know. So you're seeing a diminishment of other industries, and I guess you're seeing a growth in oil, but you're not seeing a growth in a growth in employment creation. So there's a mismatch happening. And that's why you hear terms like growth without development or jobless growth to characterize what's going on in countries like Nigeria.
And remember that, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Nigeria is not a major oil exporter to China. So China is not that engaged in the Nigerian oil sector for the most part. Nigeria sells most of its oil to Europe. And so that's just an area that in the China-Nigeria space is not as robust as it is, say, in Angola, for example.
Okay. So, and you also mentioned about the SEZ, the one particular SEZ where they are making the footwears, the free trade zone. So I guess there are two major free trade zones in Nigeria.
Okay, so the special economic zones. Yeah, there are a few special economic zones. There's one in Oakland State. There's a popular one in Lagos that's pretty renowned. As to what's happening and what's taking place there, the efficiency of those zones, is that your question?
Yeah, no, but I meant that are there only two SEZs or are there more? And are the Chinese entirely based in these two SEZs?
No. Most of the people interacting in the SEZs are maybe associated with state-owned enterprise, or they have some sort of affiliation to even get access to the SEZ. But most of the entrepreneurs that I'm looking at and that are actually present in Nigeria will not be on a log in registered to these SEZs. They're operating kind of like clandestine, they're operating kind of under the radar, and they're normally small businesses. Most of these private entrepreneurs are literally people who have worked in factories in China, who have the experience of operating a factory and then move and migrate for whatever reason. And actually, most people don't even take that step of moving to an entire different continent, let alone Africa. But the type of people that are operating here in the Chinese actors are not just the state-owned people that are associated with SEZs or free trade zones. They're average people with a lot of savings, having worked at these factories for years, that they're using out of their own money to start a business abroad. So tracking that and getting to know those companies is very interesting. And there's been there's been some preliminary field work done by Johns Hopkins Kari. I noted the work done by Irene Sun. And in order to actually get a sense of what's going on and who are the real Chinese actors that could potentially be the development partners, we really do have to get an understanding of the private enterprises that constitute the Chinese makeup in these African countries.
Eric, could you give us your take about these industries and the SEZs with respect to Ethiopia?
Well, so Ethiopia is probably more advanced in developing its light manufacturing than almost any other country in the continent, light manufacturing, because when we look at Algeria and South Africa, they're much more advanced in heavy manufacturing, so automotive and things like that. But the SEZs have done better in Ethiopia than elsewhere. And again, the classic kind of example that people give is the Huajian shoe factory that Aisha talked about. Huajian is a major global shoe manufacturer, and they were one of the first big apparel and shoe companies to come into Ethiopia. There have been a lot more. It's interesting because Ethiopia is also positioning itself as a manufacturing hub into Europe. Most of the manufacturing that's happening in Ethiopia is not meant to, say, be re-exported back to Asia. These are for either the domestic African markets, or they're meant for export into Europe. In some cases, there is a little bit of going to the United States through AGOA and the African Growth and Opportunity Act. One question that people have is, will these SEZs and these FTZs, and there's an FTZ that's being built in Djibouti right now, which is very interesting, by the Chinese as well, will that be the kind of gateway into African industrialization and manufacturing? And I come from the school of thought that Africa is not going to benefit too much from the offshoring of Chinese manufacturing. That most of that Chinese manufacturing is going to stay here in Southeast Asia. So these SEZs will probably continue to be focused on a lot of the businesses like what Aisha was talking about, the light manufacturing, the flip-flops, the small businesses meant for domestic consumers in Ethiopia or regional consumers as well.
And how much of all this does it fall within the realm of BRI or the OBOR?
BRI can be anything you want it to be. It's a Rorschach test. So, is the flip-flop factory that Aisha profiled, that Irene and Sun profiled, part of BRI? No, but is the big data hub that's in Djibouti, that's part of the Digital Silk Road? Yes. So BRI is a very complicated thing. A lot of these small light manufacturing things have nothing to do with BRI.
But I'll give you a pro tip, something interesting. So that factory is not explicitly a part of the BRI, but one of the ways that I got the interview was by mentioning the BRI.
Yes.
And I know.
And that's how you get money too. If you want to get a loan, just say it's part of BRI and they'll give you money.
Yeah. So it's part of the Chinese psyche. Everybody is very much aware of it, and also kind of paying deference to that. So even if I think the thought was that if they had saw that they got an invitation that had to do with doing research on the BRI as a Chinese company, and they declined, perhaps that could come back to them in a negative way. So I think, those are just the power of these concepts that everybody can get behind, and kind of, even though it's very vague and it's a catch-all, these concepts that China and that the CCP comes up with is extremely effective for creating a solidarity amongst Chinese people throughout the world and getting them on the same page with different initiatives. So, because this has to do with the vision of China for the next 30, 50 years, the BRI. And it's about global expansion. It's about a lot of things, about developing relationships, of course, finding new markets, creating new markets for Chinese businesses. So just in case anybody is interested in doing this sort of work, understanding Chinese concepts, Chinese initiatives, and speaking to that is an effective way of bridging the gap, so that they understand that you're not, because exactly what are you coming to do to interview me? What does it have to do with, my work or where I'm from? I found that, mentioning the BRI was extremely helpful.
Thank you so much. So I guess you can continue your presentation because you have killed 10 minutes and most of the members are back.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. I'm minimizing here. All right, so where I left off was around switching into the second part of my research, which was looking at the public partnership with China in Abia State. So to begin with, the participants of this program that went to do the 1 month technical vocational training in Chengdu, China, these are their businesses. This is a picture of one of the businesses, and as you can see, the employee there is an apprentice, and the work is done all by hand. So this is giving us a window into the ways that Nigerians are able to enter into this footwear industry. Entering in via capital intensive products or machinery makes the barriers of entry too high. So most people just start by learning how to craft the shoe by hand. And when I say most, I mean like 99%. Okay, so we see that here. And then we also see, again, the variety of the shoe, which is really different and distinct from the Chinese flip-flop, which is uniform. There's only one design. But here, because you have a bunch of independent shoemakers who are essentially their own brands and their own companies, even though they may be working in like a co-op setting, an area market is an open air market, extremely rudimentary, as you could kind of see from the previous workshops. So there's a large variety of flip-flops that are sandals that are being made, and they are mainly made out of leather. They typically retail for 2,500, and this is supposed to compete with the 500 Naira flip-flop. But it sells wholesale for 400 Naira, but once it reaches their destinations, it's about 2,500. So I brought up this flying geese schema just to show the progression that a company can take or an industry can take when they have a leadership in a direction to go to start heading towards. So for most of the Nigerian companies, and sorry that I'm kind of switching my terms here. For most of the Nigerian companies, it is a labor-intensive business model and approach. And again, makes sense because we have a youth bulge. We have so many young people who need jobs. So right now they're at a stage where they're operating via labor and able to create, a good amount of product and shoes. So again, this is just a general idea of how the business model is. It's labor intensive. They focus on batch production, not mass production, and they're rather export oriented. And I was seeing that to actually be a vulnerability to their business, to the Nigerian business model. And again, kind of interesting that the Chinese flip-flop factory is focusing on tapping the domestic market while the Nigerian is thinking about tapping others. So from the interviews with 7 of these 30 participants, I found that only one made a structural change to his business. A structural change meaning that some aspect of his business model was fundamentally changed. This person ended up buying an industrial sewing machine, and it increased his output. I believe 50 pairs, an additional 50 pairs per week he was able to produce from that. But for most of them, they were not able to implement what they learned from the program in their context, because they learned automated processes in using machines in shoe production. Yet in Nigeria, they do not have these machines. So for months, they hadn't been able to keep up that skill. And so what I was seeing is that from this partnership, the result is actually a knowledge leakage, because they're not using the machine. A year now, 2 years has passed. Honestly, will that skill still be there? And that investment and the money that went towards housing 30 people for 1 month in China, those are the costs that I think can be revisited. And directed into other areas. So what I found is that basically from the host country perspective, there really needs to be an understanding of where you are. There's, most people, they want to have the large stadium, they want to have the shiny factory, they want to have the shiny port. But in reality, it's like you're developing without any concept of the people there. And that's what I see. There's a lack of like human centricity when we're thinking about development. And so, yes, starting where you are, understanding your competitive advantages. Clearly, there's a competitive advantage in creativity. There's a competitive advantage in craftsmanship, and the traditional practice of craftsmanship that is really, inherent to African traditions and African cultures. And there's an abundant labor supply. Moreover, another presentation, because this is extremely interesting, there was already an existing local knowledge transfer mechanism, an indigenous one. It's an apprenticeship system that has actually created more shoemaking entrepreneurs than any foreign actor has. So why isn't this being leveraged? Why isn't this being formalized? Why isn't this being built out? And then coupled with the Chinese investment in a complementary way. Finally, we're looking at investment in research and development. I'm saying that because what the Abia state government did by having the partnership with China wasn't a bad idea, but the curriculum was not even applicable to the people who were going to learn. They weren't able to implement, again, what they learned by using the machines. So what I'm seeing is that finally, for the host country, you need to understand, before you ask China for any loan or any partnership, you need to understand your own socio-cultural context, your own historical context, and your macroeconomic context to say, okay, will this actually work? And also to ask for the right things in order to further your development, again, beginning where you are. Okay. So in conclusion, I found that the Chinese public and private partnerships were not flying geese, and they were not leading geese in terms of knowledge and technology transfer within shoe manufacturing. I also found that Nigerians are presently competing with China, but they do not have to. They can pivot into higher quality goods. Nigeria should not try to beat China at its own game. I used to work in Beijing, and I had relationships with the African embassies there. So I would hear, things like just duplicating the production structure of China and then trying to compete with them, when even the people that I interviewed that went to China said that they don't even know how they're competing with people who have all of this machinery and that are producing at mass. But interestingly, as I'm interested in development theory, I think that there's an opportunity to look at alternative development theories and to look into the artisanal economy within Nigeria. And I even came across, there's already an existing logics of economics called umunioma, meaning good brethren. So this is really different from the market accumulation tactics of the West or the race to the bottom tactics of China, where, competing with the lowest price. This instead is about dividing the market share and increasing market entry. And obviously, again, as Eric pointed out, employment, job creation is so critical. So these are the sorts of things that I think understanding where you're from would be really helpful before engaging with China. And then works in progress. So this work inspired some business consulting that I'm doing with some micro enterprise footwear companies, a data collection project to finally get statistics on these companies because it does not currently exist, and a partnership with the Abia state government on creating a board of artisanal quality assurance in hopes of developing the footwear manufacturing ecosystem. So there's that. And then there's me just enjoying my field work. So thank you so much for your attention. And I will end the presentation here.
Thank you so much, Aisha. That is amazing. And thank you so much, Eric, as well. You're both amazing, and it was a feast of knowledge for all our audiences. I guess some of them might have a few questions. David, Maur, Adrian, anyone wants to ask a question, just unmute yourselves and ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Can't hear you too well, Adrian.
Adrian, you can move your face close to the mic.
It's a little better.
Go ahead, try it.
My question is, in the U.S. market, there seems to be a major economic standpoint of products as opposed to mass-produced products. That phenomenon also takes place in the
So what I've heard is a comparison with the U.S. market or the Western market. I heard something about mass production.
No, just
There we go. Oh.
there being a major market demand.
Adrian, maybe you can move your face close to the mic, close to the
Or
keyboard.
Type your question in the chat.
Yeah,
we can't really
in chat.
hear it. We can't really hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I mean, well, maybe I have a question for some of the participants, because what I was hoping to achieve from this conversation is a way of looking at the China relationship differently. You know, I opened my presentation by saying we tend to look at China in a really polarized manner that doesn't actually allow us to explore. We like to talk about African agency, but what does that actually mean? If China's already there, and you know we're not going to use blunt economic instruments that don't do much in terms of managing the relationship, that could be really costly in terms of diplomacy if you just put sanctions. And we've seen what has happened with the U.S. and China. So how do you then have a respectable relationship where the needs of your local economy and your local civil society is being met by this really unique opportunity of having this experience, people who have gone through this development experience so recently that we can harness, that we can learn from. So, I see there are a bunch of different names. I'm assuming from many different countries. I don't know, how do other people look at the China relationship, and are you exploring, practical ways of engaging them as opposed to just, keeping it very high level? I guess it's more of a conversation.
It's a good question.
I don't know if Rama or Felipe has any thoughts on that, but
Well, I do have one more question. For instance, much of the debate when it comes to China and Africa gets somehow restricted to Western Africa, Ethiopia, Djibouti. Is it that China has made a selection that there are these countries where we can go and do something well? And has China's influence not been that much in economic terms in countries like Egypt or Morocco or South Africa?
Oh,
Actually, I think you're mistaken there, because South Africa is actually the most important country on the continent for China. It's got the largest population of ethnic Chinese. It's the number one source of investment. It's also, I think, if I'm correct, one of the largest trading partners in non-extractives. So I thought you were going to say East Africa and Southern Africa because that's really where the heart of Chinese engagement has been. West Africa is still relatively new and light footprint, and in part because in French-speaking West Africa, breaking into some of the French countries, the French-speaking countries, is much more complicated, the legal system, the language barriers and whatnot. North Africa, Egypt is actually one of the major hubs for Chinese investment. Egypt and North Africa fall under a different categorization, though, in the Chinese kind of break, the way that they see Africa. So they have MENA, for the most part, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's broken up in the Chinese government, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So oftentimes you don't see those in the same conversation, but at the end of the day, Egypt is a very important part of Africa and is there. So geopolitically, economically, Kenya, South Africa, Angola, those are the very, very important countries. Nigeria, actually, not as much.
I'll just add a fun fact that I learned 2 years ago is that Algeria had at least pre-COVID, had the largest number of Chinese construction workers on the continent.
60,000, a huge number, yeah.
Yeah, so North Africa, there is a lot of interesting activity happening there.
That's right.
The patterns seem to be a little bit different, compared to Sub-Saharan, or at least West Africa.
I guess we have got Adrian's question here. Is there a market demand for artisanal products in the Nigerian market?
Okay, great question. This is something I came across when I was saying, okay, I think that there's an opportunity to not have to compete with the Chinese goods by pivoting into higher quality goods. There is a market demand. So even though Nigeria is, a lower middle income country, it has, in 2018, it was the poverty capital of the world, outpacing India, which is impressive to have the highest of people living in extreme poverty in the world. Nonetheless, Nigeria is a place of maybe you can say contradiction because there's also a lot of wealth. There are classes of people, but I think it's also understanding the logics of kind of like people living in poverty. People living in poverty still want good quality goods, and I noticed that in Nigeria there isn't access to that. In fact, there's a premium on imported high quality goods that even if I were to purchase it in Nigeria, it would be more expensive than if I purchased it in the US or in Europe. And that's because of the duties and the import taxes and things like that, that then the consumer now has to pay. So in order to get access to, these kind of custom made, to get access to just like high quality goods from abroad, it's quite expensive. But at the same time, there is a huge artisanal economy. For instance, what I'm wearing is Nigerian made, but this is made by hand. And the price is like equivalent to maybe something you could buy in a department store. I'm just thinking I'm in the US, so in the US, and how was this made? It was made via a labor intensive method. I'm seeing that Nigerians, since they don't have access to this, when they do identify a producer that can create something reliably, that they pretty much have a devoted clientele. So one of the clients that I've been speaking to over the quarantine period, and particularly when the lockdown happened in Nigeria, said that who makes shoes, based in Aba, he said that he was continually getting orders even during the lockdown. And when they lifted the lockdown, that he wasn't even able to keep up with his orders. So right now, he like about 2 weeks ago, he just moved into a larger a workshop and he has more apprentices. But that goes to show you that there are some businesses that can't even keep up with their demand and that they need support. They're promising businesses that I think can be leaders. And I just think that alongside China, it should make us want to look within our own countries, especially with COVID. We should be looking internally. China seems to value all these markets that a lot of African countries, they don't pay attention to. Why is that? I think we can take that as a signal to, invest and research in these areas. So to answer the question in short, yes.
Felipe, do you want to ask a question? Felipe Cadena?
No, thanks.
Okay, so perfect. I've got a question from someone sitting next to me.
Hello.
Okay, there's someone there. Okay, hello, Rama. Yeah, you can go ahead, ask a question.
What's the idea? The Africa can become a rich country in the future. What's your idea?
Okay. I think that it's possible, and I think that it's really important for especially anyone from a developing country, anybody who's African, to be coming up with ideas and visions about what a rich Africa looks like. What I saw one quote that I liked, I think it's even common, shape your world or others will. And honestly, one of the things that inspired this research was seeing the book The Next Factory of the World, because to me it was kind of saying, but who said that Africa should be a factory for the world? Even though that worked for China, which African said that that's a good idea for their for their country? And so I think, yes, a rich Africa is totally possible, but there has to be more investment in how people are conceptualizing what a rich Africa looks like. And, as much as people like to say, oh, and in America, how Black Americans ideate the future of Africa, there are qualms and issues with it. But nonetheless, what I say is that at least there's an ideation that looks attractive that people can begin to work towards, instead of just leaving it to globalization to somehow work this out, when it's also the reason why we're in the situation we are in, where you have a lot of populist leaders and things like that, because jobs aren't being created in these Western countries. They're offshoring a lot of their work. But anyway, but yes, a rich Africa, I believe, is possible.
Okay,
Thanks
so
very
there's
much.
a question. Hello, someone is there? Okay, so am I audible? Perfect. Hello, Eric?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, like we see, there are these three places in the world: China, Africa, India, all with 1 billion plus populations. China has an amazing infrastructure in terms of road, electricity, internet. Everything works perfectly well. In India, they are trying to catch up somehow, not up to that level. But when it comes to Africa, I saw that picture of the potholes that you showed us right outside the factory. And I would like to know both of your comments, like what is the level of connectivity within Africa in terms of internet speed, as well as electricity, road, and when China came in, did they also like lay down a roadmap that will get infrastructure right first, and then we'll move on to other things, and also infrastructure activities will add to the GDP, at least in numbers when statistics is taken into account.
Okay, that's a great question. Eric, do you want to comment?
Sure. So internet. So I lived in Congo back in the mid 2000s, and when I first got to Kinshasa, there was virtually no internet, and there was virtually very few mobile phones. And in the space of 3 to 4 years, it just blossomed. I mean, just out of nowhere. And Huawei, ZTE, and Chinese telecom companies deserve most of the credit for that. 70% of Africa's 4G network was built by just Huawei alone. Now, the Chinese bring, and Huawei in particular, an advantage over everybody else because not only do they have the technology, not only is the technology more affordable, but also it comes with financing. And that's a key difference between, say, Samsung, Nokia, Alcatel, all the other competitors. And so China has been absolutely indispensable when it comes to building Africa's telecom infrastructure. And then that continues to be the case. It's moving now into artificial intelligence. It's moving into way more varied sectors, all the way from, again, Transsion is the company that most of you have probably never heard of. Some of you in South Asia may know about it. But it is the dominant cell phone provider on the continent in terms of hardware. But at the same time, it also has a walled garden for the operating system and whatnot. So it's now also the largest music service with Boomplay, 63 million customers across the continent. It's crushing Apple and Spotify. It also has Pompay in Nigeria, which is mobile money. It's creating all of these services as well. This is all, of course, Chinese. So when we talk about technology infrastructure, the Chinese have been absolutely critical. In terms of physical infrastructure, the Chinese have also been very important, but that is going to now enter into a very new phase. And I'm surprised that we are now an hour and a half into our conversation and nobody's brought up the question of debt. Debt is a really important question. And the problem now is that African governments simply do not generate the amount of money needed to repay the loans. Not just loans to China, by the way, but loans to bondholders, loans to the IMF, loans to the African Development Bank. You name the loan, they're having difficulty, in part because when you sell raw materials and commodities, you are entirely subject to whatever the commodity prices are. So if the commodity prices are up high, like copper is today, you're making a lot of money. But if you're selling oil when prices are low like they are today, well, then you're going to have a big problem. And they're not adding value to the exports that they're creating. And as a result, the revenues are not increasing. So infrastructure, I think, going forward is the critical thing to do all the things that Aisha talked about in terms of manufacturing. Because at the end of the day, you cannot have a factory that employs people if there's not consistent power. And any of you who've lived in Africa know that power is one of the most chronic problems. 2, 3, 4 hours a day sometimes, there are either blackouts, brownouts, interruptions, and it's not stable. And China has been doing quite a bit on that, but going forward, there's a lot of indication that the days of big ticket Chinese infrastructure loans are now coming to an end, and it probably will not go further. So infrastructure is going to be the critical question in the years ahead.
All right, I'll add that to the point about like phone adoption, data on the continent is still expensive. And yeah, it's so that makes it like not entirely accessible at the moment to a lot of like average people, and especially to the entrepreneurs that I met, the shoemakers. They do not own smartphones. They do not have online stores. You know, they do not. I mean, even communicating with them, I mean, on top of the poor, just like phone lines, it's quite difficult. So everything is really analog at the moment. But again, I see that as a really big opportunity for growth. And that's where I see that tech enablement can potentially happen. And I'm exploring that with my my current work. I'll also make the point that, so the infrastructure is interesting because there's an economist, Justin E. Fulin, who was behind the growth identification and facilitation framework, former economist at the World Bank, I believe the only chief economist from a developing country, and he's from China, I believe, Taiwan.
Born in Taiwan, but now moved to China. So he's a little bit of both.
Yeah, he has an interesting background where he like defected from Taiwan.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Very unusual.
Yeah. So yes, he's done a lot of great work, and he's written about the flying geese theory. He's written about China, and he said that you don't have to build the infrastructure to start developing. So again, because these things, I'm also really interested. What can we do now today? Because again, when is the road going to be built? You see in Nigeria, even if they built the road, which they have done, it can be eroded. There have been so many newly built roads that even between 2015 and 2019 was when I was last there, a road that I saw that was built, you know, pothole ridden. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to the culture of maintenance. And that requires, honestly, mind reformation. I remember when I went to India, I went to Mumbai on like a social enterprise class trip. We were learning about different social enterprises in Chennai and in Mumbai. And that was something, I mean, I know people from there will have their own ideas about the country, but I did notice that there was an organization and that there was maintenance that was taking place, at least along the roads, painting the dividers on the road. And, you know, there was something going on. There was just a little bit more attention to detail that I saw in Nigeria, even though I think that it's actually very interesting to look at Nigeria and India as comparators because of the large population, the multiplicity of languages, the numerous religions, you know, so I think, you know, to look at that is quite helpful. But yeah, there is, I believe from what Justin E. Fulin said, you can start developing without that infrastructure. But obviously, if you want to industrialize, that's a different story, you know. But I'm also seeing that the process of industrialization doesn't just happen overnight. There has to be, the country has to go through some things. They have to have experience. So I'm even before industrialization, I'm also researching like an agricultural revolution. Why aren't people emphasizing that? They think that Nigeria or African countries can just leapfrog to industrialization when China had an agricultural revolution. The US had one. So it's like, why is Africa somehow an exception? And if we just leapfrog, are we missing out on a huge opportunity when a lot of people don't have access to these urban cities? There's really only one major city in Nigeria. Okay, well, there's two. You can say Abuja, you can say Lagos, you can say some others. But if you're going to say a tier one city equivalent in Nigeria, it would be Lagos. 21 million people are there. But not everybody, but the country is 206 million. That's what the US AID had quoted for 2020, 206 million. That means everybody else is dispersed in rural areas. So I'm very interested in how can we develop people there, because then you also have the urban rural migration that doesn't really help anybody. So I'm very much interested in development strategies that work now, and how Justin Ifulin was conceptualizing or understanding China's development as beginning before even the roads were built. But I think we can try to understand this a little bit differently.
So Ivana has sent us a question. There are many militias and irregular armies in Africa. How do the Chinese contractors and businessmen deal with them? And she has asked us another question. Will China one day replace France as the external military power in Africa?
Let's see. The second question is absolutely 100% no. That is, China has no interest to become a military power in Africa. There's nothing. I mean, it has a base in Djibouti, but that base is not intended really to serve mainland Africa. It's a support base for its operations in the Gulf of Aden. It points into the Persian Gulf. It's more about keeping the supply lines in the Indian Ocean. So there is zero interest whatsoever for China to have unilateral military actions in Africa. So that will not happen. China is a very important player in United Nations peacekeeping. They are the largest contributor of peacekeeping forces among the permanent 5 members. They have about 2,500 troops. Most of them are based in Africa, in South Sudan and Mali in particular. They are combat troops. So you will see Chinese military presence in Africa, but almost exclusively under the United Nations flag. What was the first question again?
It was about replacing France.
No.
No, it was a businessman. How do Chinese business?
Yeah, so the Chinese that's a great question. And the Chinese have a very high risk tolerance, much higher than those from other countries. And so they will go into post-conflict zones or even active conflict zones to do business, much more so than investors from other countries. So take the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where the coltan and the cobalt and the nickel mines are based. The Chinese are big players that they are there, and this kind of is all across the continent. Now, they have a very expanding field of private security contractors. Now, there's only 1 or 2 Chinese private security contractors that are authorized to carry weapons. The vast majority of Chinese private security contractors in Africa are unarmed. So they don't think of it like the Blackwater private security contractor that the Americans had. What these private security contractors are doing is they're working with local intermediaries to facilitate relationships, to pay people that they need to pay, and to really make sure that they can do business. That being said, Chinese nationals are kidnapped at a rather high rate, especially in places like Nigeria, in the DRC. It's because they are out on the frontier of business in places that are less stable. They are much more exposed. But at the end of the day, they are on their own. You will not see a Rambo-type mission to come in and save Chinese nationals in the eastern DRC or in northern Nigeria. That's just not the way the Chinese government really thinks. But they use a lot of private security contractors, both indigenous to African countries, as well as their own advisors to help them manage, especially the big state-owned enterprises.
I'll just add to the question about France. France's relationships with their previous colonial states is very intimate. So even talking to French Africans and trying to replace China with France, I found that to be a sensitive topic. Like, as in, they can't even talk. As in, they really can't talk about China without consulting France. There are a number of mechanisms down to the currency that's being used that really positions French African countries in a different category when it comes to like dealing with China. So yeah, France has a different sort of hold on some countries. So I think that their presence is likely to last for a long time.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you so much, Eric, for your time and your explanations. It was indeed great for audiences and our future audiences who are going to watch it on our Facebook page, and we are going to share the links with you.
Wonderful.
And so before we leave, why don't you let the audiences know about your podcast or your how to get in touch with you on Twitter?
Sure. Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Olander, Olander. I tweet on China, Africa 15, 20 times a day. So if you really want the full feed of China, Africa, that's where to go. I also do a podcast twice a week. We're interviewing experts like Aisha, and we're going to have Aisha on the show very soon. One of these, I'm very excited to have Aisha on our show. So if you want to listen to the people who are actually thinking about these things, and one of the things that we do with our show, which is very, very different than a lot of other podcasts, is we focus on inclusivity. So you'll notice that the guests that we have on our show are predominantly 90+% from China or from Africa. We also interview a lot of young people. We just had a Nigerian medical student. We also have a lot of women on the show. And so we really want to make sure that we're broadening the discussion beyond just a bunch of white old guys in Washington, D.C. talking about these things, because that is played. We have a Facebook page at China Africa Project. And of course, you can just come to our website at ChinaAfricaProject.com, all of our news and analysis. And for you guys who are students, we have a thing called Student Exchange, where we make our platform available to high school and college students who are not experts in this, not like Aisha, but who just want to think and exchange. Because again, if we're not talking to young people, especially in a place like Africa, then you're not part of that discussion. And so we really want to create